by the way, I'm going to talk about the reception of these two novels. But when I decided to do this, I didn't know somebody else was going to talk about this. I thought the person who's going to talk about my books is going to talk about my more recent books. So forgive me if certain parts you've already heard, etc., etc. But I doubt it very much. Anyway, it is a saying of an ancient sage, and I personally believe that if it's not, deserves to be one, that humor is the only test of gravity. The exile is not a smooth crystal stair or a bed of perfumed rose petals, we all know that. However, if we, and by we I mean writers, are set to demonstrate our misfortunes, it is no good painting everything in black, and sometimes indeed blacker than black. Some shades of brighter colors are necessary to save us from sounding monotonous and boring. I strongly hold the idea that even in most tragic events, gruesome atmospheres, and despondent situations, one can find a comical streak and a funny side that, when added to the picture, helps to put the tragedy, the gruesomeness, and the despondency into relief. For me, the essence of humor is love, which springs from the heart and causes a playful laughter. For me, humor, although consistent with pathos, keeps up a kind of daylight in the mind that fills it with a steady and perpetual serenity. For me, the best remedy of a sad heart is to use humor constantly, if need be by imitating hilarity and mimicking cheerfulness. The kind of hell-raising in humor, as far as I am concerned, is incompatible with contempt or indignation. For me, humor is all that and much more. I quite honestly believe that I owe the little mental sanity that I can still boast of to witticism and all its nuances. During the 4 decades of writing, I have produced very few humorless stories. The dose of wit in the others obviously varies from one subject to another. In my diptych, for example, Der Hazard that you heard about today, Der Hazard by the men roughly means at home, and Der Hazard just as roughly away, which the former depicts the Islamic revolution in Iran, and the latter the attitude of Persians in diaspora. I have used all shapes and shades of humor, from joke and jest to sarcasm, satire, irony, mirth, mock, scoff, and you name it. Tonight, however, I'm not going to brag about my brand of funniness, but rather about the reaction to the reception of these 2 books by my compatriots. At the time of Der Hazard's publication, that was in the 1980s, there were hardly any Persian bookshops in Paris. Even today, the number is negligible, and books are sold mostly in haberdasheries or groceries run by Persians, alongside dried lemons, smoked fish, and split peas imported from Iran. Therefore, I had to store about 500 copies of that voluminous book in my already paper-ridden apartment and post them one by one to those who had the good grace to buy them. One of the first calls I received was from a young man who said, half inquiring, half affirmative, "Mr. Amirshahi?" My baritone hello on the telephone is sometimes confusing, as I laughed and gently corrected the boy. "Forgive my masculine voice, I'm a female. What can I do for you?" "Your husband isn't home," he asked. knowing fully well that I did not have a husband, and taking it for granted that others were aware of it too, I said less gently, "We don't have a Mr. Amirshahi here. Now, if I can be of any service," he interrupted me. "In that case, with whom am I to talk about Dar Hazar?" he asked. "With me," I answered firmly. "In that case," he continued with an angelic patience, "will you give the message to your husband?" My voice certainly did not have any angelic note to it. Then I retorted, "Sir, would you kindly forget about husband, Mr. Amirshahi, and myself? What do you want to know about Dar Hazar?" "I want to buy a copy," he said at long last, and still very innocently. I gave him the address, mentioned the price, and added, "As soon as the check arrives, the book shall be posted." I received the check a couple of days later. It was made to Mr. Another call came from a woman who sounded middle-aged and introduced herself, but her name did not ring a bell. Therefore, I wished her a good day and waited for her to start the conversation. "Excuse me," she started, "what branch of Amirshahis do you come from?" This is a favorite question by Persians, but I never know how to answer it. The fruitful branch, the barren, the green, or the dried up branch. So I passed over the inquiry by giving a very vague explanation. The lady insisted encouragingly, "Aren't you the cousin of Isa Khan, or indeed Fatma Khanum's niece, or perhaps the sister-in-law of Mahmoud June?" In my country, no matter how remotely related, we are all uncles and aunts to one another. Therefore, I said with embarrassment, "I don't know for sure. I might be considered," and started to stammer. The caller magnanimously came to my rescue. "I have decided to go to America," she said in a confidential tone. "What a headache, though, to put one's passport in order and all that." Then she continued with some enthusiasm, "But suddenly in a newspaper I came across your name, and by hook or by crook found your telephone number. Apparently you've written a novel." "Well, sort of," I pointed out with modesty. "Wonderful, that's good," she said gallantly. "What's it called?" "Dar Hazar," I replied, with haste, taking care to reflect all the majesty of my work into its headline. Interesting," she said thoughtfully. "Anyhow, seeing that article about you, I told myself straight away that a writer brought up in the bosom of dear old Isa Khan and Fatma Khanum is sure to know a good solicitor or barrister to advise me how to go about obtaining my visa." To my greatest regret, I did not know any solicitor or barrister, and shamefacedly admitted to it. Hence our conversation ended there. Before I get to the reception of the second part of the diptych, Dar Safar, I must tell you one last anecdote concerning Dar Hazar, more or less a feedback from Iran. Needless to say that in my fatherland, my books are untouchable and their titles unmentionable. Therefore, when an old friend of mine dropped me a line to inform me that he is in possession of a copy of Dar Hazar, I was beside myself with joy, and wrote back immediately to inquire how. Because government studios open any book sent to Iran by post unceremoniously. If considered dangerous, thrown into the dustbin. If estimated of some interest, confiscated, and only if believed completely harmless and worthless, delivered to the rightful owner, to the receiver. The explanation my friend was simply the explanation of my friend was simply delightful. He had actually asked a student of Oriental Studies in Utrecht to send the book to him, and he indeed received it through the post office after the competent authorities had examined the parcel. He had received it only because the learned investigators had misread the title Dar Hazar, which was blacklisted, Dar Khezr, which means an opening to a prophet's ends. This is a holy book, in that Republic of Allah on earth cannot but be delivered promptly to its righteous and rightful owner. Now to their safar. I should have eaten that thing at lunch. That safar which I told you means away. Thus I deals with my fellow countrymen and women living abroad.
No, it's all right.
After the hustle and bustle about there has died down, I went through an incredibly blissful period. Not only I was treated in a civil way, I was almost cherished, venerated, pampered by one and sundry in the community. I evidently put all that affectionate attention to the account of my latest literary achievement, and gleefully thought I amply deserved. Vanity, vanity. My name is Mahshid Amirshahi in this particular case. How on earth could I have guessed that they did not give two hoots for the first part of the diptych, but had only put on the best Sunday dresses to look good in the second? When I discovered the truth, I could have kicked myself for being so naive. That was the prevailing reaction while I was busy writing that affair. The one immediately after its publication, however, was a general rush to establish the who is who of the book, which caused quite a stir among friends and foes alike, and annoyed me greatly. More annoying still was the fact that some of those who is who hunters had the cheeks to send me the lists for correction. In answer to similar curiosity around the characters outlined in À la recherche de temps perdu by Marcel Proust, Jean Cocteau once said, Fabre wrote a book about insects, but he did not expect them to read his book, nor did he give them any identity cards or Christian names to termites or bees. How I long to quote him, but nowadays it would be politically incorrect to give such an exquisite answer, would it not? About the reaction of the prototypes, none of whom, by the way, occupies more than a paragraph or two in those 400-odd pages, by the way, it suffices to say that every single one acted as if the book was his or her personal biography, hence grumbled that his or her long list of virtues have been unjustly neglected and his or her non-existent vices unduly added. In short, the perfectly clear message to me was, unscramble the eggs you have scrambled or else. They unanimously accused me of putting them in front of a concave or convex mirror that distorts their images. To that accusation, I plead not guilty. All I have done is to place people, starting with yours truly, under a magnifying glass, primarily to have a hearty laugh at ourselves when seeing for the first time the close-up of those fluffy tufts of hair stuck invited out of our nostrils or grown unwantedly on our chins. Then perhaps start thinking of plucking them out resolutely one by one to become less ridiculous. A handful out of this pleased crowd turned up at Montparnasse Cemetery when I lost my sister. Without a word of condolence, they stuck together like a bunch of grapes, eyeing me suspiciously from afar, taking me for the naughty fox that would eat them no matter how sour they are. Before the ceremony started, I was talking to one of the cremators about some details, when one grape detached itself from the bunch and rolled hastily towards me. Then, as if on second thoughts, decided that I did not deserve any sympathy afterward, and briskly faced the undertaker, shook his hand warmly, and gave an inflammatory lecture on life and death, hotter than the gas, burning with a sinister hue in the furnace of the crematorium. By the way, in Persian and with an Isfahani accent, if you please. The French undertaker, who looked by the requirement of his job, crestfallen, now genuinely appeared mournful. He too poured out his choicest cliches to share the fiery grief of the unforgiving intruder. I blew my nose to camouflage my uncontrollable giggle in that graveyard, and in his fit of morality, my fellow citizen was at his best at the demagogue I had depicted him in my book. As days go by, I notice that the living models resemble more and more the created characters of their safar. The former must be emulating the latter, surely. I could not have been so perspicuous to paint them so accurately. Laughter. Laughter for me is a cipher key with which to decipher the whole man. Progress, I agree, is nothing but victory of laughter over dogma. Putting aside philosophy, I need to laugh. I must laugh. And in spite of everything, I will laugh. They say that a person who laughs much has the nature of a fool. I say that a person who laughs not at all has the nature of an old cat. To them, laughter is just a mind sneezing. To me, it is the echo of the silvery fabric of ocean waves. Why is it? Why is it, for heaven's sake, that when a cartoonist illustrates our physical characteristics by exaggerating them, we do not feel all that indignant? But when a writer demonstrates our moral characteristics by humorously elaborating on them, we start riding our high horses. I have often thought, if only we could learn to laugh at ourselves and bear to be laughed at, not only we have achieved something, but we have distinguished ourselves. However, when the only person among my compatriots with these qualities rang to say a few kind words about the book, he woke me up so early in the morning that almost jeopardized our relationship for good. You see, if you make a little fish talk, she would invariably talk like a whale. That is why, in this borrowed, whalish manner, I do not let you go away with the impression that I have had nothing but complaints. After all, my readers are cleverer than my characters by half, and I hope outnumber them by far. Time is definitely up, as I told you, and I promise, and I'm not going to make the mistake of Nima to make it too long and be bored myself. So this is absolutely time is up. I cannot ever thank you enough for giving me this opportunity to talk about nothing but myself. And I've heard so much German these days that I've learned this 3 words here by myself on me in English. And ich, über, von mir, is that right? All right. I'm eternally indeed indebted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a second speaker.